Okay, I think we're gonna get started. Hello everyone. My name is Jingjing. I'm the horticulture educator from CCE Chemung. Thank you for coming to CCE Chemung online vegetable gardening course for beginners. This course is based on the C2 separate course, which is a comprehensive beginning vegetable gardening course designed by Oregon Food Bank and the Oregon State University Extension Service. I will post the link of the course manual in the chat box. If you want to download the manual, please click the link. This course includes 5 sessions, and today our math gardener, Brandy, is going to present the first session, Planning Your Garden. So now I'm going to turn it over to Brandy. Thank you, Brandy.
Hi, everyone. It's great to see you. Super excited about this. I'm right now going to share my screen, if you'll give me a moment here. And we're going to start the presentation. So hopefully you guys can see the presentation now. It should fill the screen and everything. We are talking about how to plan your garden, which I know can be a little bit intimidating. It was a little bit intimidating for me when I first started, but the tools that you have in the booklet that you'll be getting and in this PowerPoint presentation will hopefully make planning your garden a little bit easier. We start by making a planting plan, right? Which means you think about what you want to do, what you want to plant. And in the booklet that you'll be receiving, there is something called a common crop chart. This is a great place to start when it comes to planting your garden, because it gives you the ability to imagine all the different things that you would like to put in your garden. And then it tells you when they need to be planted, whether you need to do them as a transplant or you can start them direct sow as seeds. How big they get, we'll see actually that goes into planting the height actually of the plants that you'll be planting, how long it takes to harvest them, especially in our region, because as you guys well know, we don't have a long growing season. So having enough time to harvest from the first planting to the end of the season is very important. Like, I really don't like to do watermelons because I don't feel like we have enough time for them to get big enough, you know? A question of shading. Your space, it's unique to you, and your space actually determines what you can plant. Is it a full sun requiring plant, or can it take a little bit of shade, for example? And also you may want to get into succession planting, which is a really great way to maximize your space. So crops that are finished in the spring or early summer can be replaced by crops that grow well starting in the fall, like peas to garlic, for example. So I don't think you guys have the chart in front of you, and I don't know how well you can see this slide. Can y'all see this slide very well? I know you're muted too. But please feel free to say something either in chat or speak up if you would like, unmute your microphone and say something, or ask a question in chat, and Jingjing will bring it up, because I want you guys to ask questions and be an interactive part of this. So I am going to ask you guys if you can see the chart at all. Can you see it? You can see it. Can you read it? Oh, good. Thank you, Ross. Okay, excellent. I see some folks. Excellent. So if you can you tell me really quickly the kind of vegetables that you are imagining that you want to put in your garden? Have you got an idea as to what you might want to put in?
I mean, I tried tomatoes and peppers. I tried cucumbers last year, but I ended up with these little things that looked like hand grenades. They were actually lemon cucumbers. That's not
right?
what the little thing said on the plant. But yeah, and it was, let's just say it wasn't a very good experiment with any of it.
Right. And, you know, that can be a challenge. A lot of times things that people think should be really easy can be more challenging than you might expect. Amy says that she has a large space and she's going to put pretty much everything on the chart in, and you guys can see the chart. So that's exciting. So it's good to imagine what you might want to try. Like maybe you're going to want to try cucumbers again, Ross. Maybe you're going to try something else entirely. I know when I've not done well with something, I've kind of maybe put it off for a year and come back to it. When you think about what you want to grow, you're going to want to think about what you like to eat. I know that seems like really obvious, but sometimes I've spoken to other gardeners, you know, they grow things and then it's really not actually something that's part of their diet. So really think about whether you want something, you know, don't just grow it because you think all gardeners grow something. Grow things that are realistic. Some things in our gardens or some things that people want to grow are not particularly realistic. For example, things that take a long time to mature may not be the best for our growing region right now, or it may not be something that you could do right now. Later on, you can learn ways to extend the growing season. You can learn to plant earlier and also extend the growing season later so that you can actually add a repertoire of different plants to what is in your garden. But in the beginning, especially if you're a beginner, and I haven't asked, I should have asked guys, as to whether you feel that you're a beginner gardener, or whether you feel that you're an intermediate, or maybe you're an expert, and that would be great too. But in the beginning, if you are beginning and you want to make sure that you're successful and you feel confident going forward, look for something that has a shorter growing season in our region. Things that are cost effective. Oh, I didn't bring it. Some things are cost effective and some things aren't, right? I bought some fancy seeds that are like $7 a pack. Not very cost effective. So if you don't feel like you want to invest a lot of money, there are varieties and such that are more cost effective than others. And that, again, we all have a budget and we're all very concerned about making sure that the garden isn't just a very expensive hobby, but is actually helpful to us, right? I'm assuming, and this is making an assumption on my part, that all of us are here, most of us are here because we really want to actually extend our food budget and recoup some of the investment so that we're not growing like a $15 tomato, you know. And finally, there are space limitations. So who was it who said that she had, was it Amy? Let me see if I can bring up the chat again. Who said that she had a huge space and could plant a lot of things. Some of us only have a small space. And so that's going to, you know, determine what you can plant. You're going to have to maybe triage, right? What you can plant. You can plant some things, but you're going to have to forego planting other things. So in the beginning, if you're still feeling a little bit overwhelmed, and maybe you're really excited and wanting to jump in, but maybe you don't know how to start, think about what you like to eat. Like a lot of folks like tomatoes, a lot of folks like peas. Peas grow really well in our region. So you can start with just making a list of what you enjoy and what you like to eat. I'm back to our friend, the chart here. So you may be asking at this point, hey, how do I go about determining what grows well in our climate? That's a big question, right? And we have some links in the chat. And I apologize, gang. Let me go back here. There's a link in the chat to a Cornell resource that gives you recommended varieties for our region. So if you know that you want to grow tomatoes, but there are so many different varieties of tomatoes, you may be thinking to yourself, hey, how do I go about and find those tomatoes that we know will do well in this region? So if you go to the first link that I put, if you scroll all the way up in the chat, that will give you a resource that will actually give you recommended varieties for things like tomatoes or beans, that kind of thing. Beets do really, really well in our area as well. Now, at this point, have you, any of you, thought that you might want to grow things that you don't see on the chart? And you're wondering, well, how do I do it if it's not part of this chart she keeps talking about? So Maura says that she's going to grow cucumbers and tomatoes, beans, peppers, lettuce. That's exciting. And thank you, Jingjing, for sharing the course material. Artichokes. Amy is attempting artichokes. That is awesome. Now that can be ambitious, but that's fantastic as well. Artichokes have a longer growing season. They're intimidating for me. I haven't tried them yet. That is really wonderful. So Amy, what made you want to do artichokes? Have you done them before? I should ask, start with that. Karen says, I tried lima beans a couple of times with no luck. Are they difficult to grow? Beans can be challenging. Beans can be perhaps a little bit difficult to actually get to sprout. It depends on where the problem occurred. You know, did you get plants? Like last year I tried to grow runner beans, and they were really stunted because I planted them too early. And we're going to get to talking about when to plant in just a minute. Amy says rabbits got the artichokes that she started earlier. And yeah, rabbits are. Oh. And later on, one of the sessions we'll be talking about garden pests, which can be helpful, hopefully. So it sounds like you all have a good idea of what you might want to plant, and you recognize, again, the challenges that could be, for example, do you transplant? Do you direct sow? What's the actual length of time it takes to grow the plants? That kind of thing. And we're going to go through this information in greater detail in just a minute. One last thing that I wanted to point out when it comes to planning your garden is to consider something called a footprint. It's a big challenge. I know when I was a beginner gardener, still even now, and I've seen it in other people's gardens, people underestimate just how big these plants get. So when you think about planning your garden, you need to consider the full size of the mature plant. You also need to consider the space it's going to take for you to get to the full size of that mature plant, right? So oftentimes people overplant. I am really guilty of that. Make sure that when you write out your planting plan that you're considering, okay, realistically, how many plants can I get in here without causing overcrowding? And overcrowding can lead to some problems we'll discuss about later. Here is an example. A pumpkin plant takes up a lot of space, and you don't get as much yield from the plants as you might get from other plants that you could put in. So if you have the space, right, that's fantastic. But if you have a smaller garden space, consider that maybe pumpkins may not be the best investment. And again, the resources that we're providing for you will allow you to research and say, well, I want to do this. I really like the idea of planting this plant, but how big does it get? What's the yield? How, you know, what resources do I need to put into it to allow me to determine whether it's the best beginning plant for my garden, excuse me. So consider, for example, chard or beets or other plants, you know, they take up a lot less space, right? So, and you get a lot more yield for it. When you develop, when you work on planning your garden, one of the things that we recommend that you do is that you develop a personal planting plan. And so you would actually sketch this out. And this is going to be in the booklet that you're receiving, by the way. But it might be something that you could sketch on a piece of paper or do in Excel if you want to get fancy, right? To plan out all of these different things. I know that I'm not good at retaining this information in my head, right? I don't remember off the top of my head exactly how many days to harvest for this particular variety of tomatoes, right? I don't remember because it varies even from variety to variety. In fact, when you look at seed catalogs, and if you've been gardening for a while, like you probably compulsively read seed catalogs, am I right? And even that's one of the first things they put in there is, what are the days to harvest? And so write it down. It might seem tedious. I know I have a hard time getting my kids to do it. I have a hard time doing it myself. I always think, oh, I'll remember. It really helps to actually write down what's the crop, what's the variety, and then, what's my planting date? How many days will it take until it's ready? Because again, having that actual information is very helpful, because you think to yourself, oh, is there something wrong with my plant? Is it, no, just, it's not, maybe not time, right? Put down in your planting plan the height that you expect it to be. Obviously, vines are going to get a lot taller than plants that are not vines. So that is going to affect where you might want to put them in the garden. We're going to talk in just a few minutes about the location of different crops, and also a little bit of crop rotation so that you can reduce pests and other damage or issues with there are problems that come up with plants are planted in the same space over time. And so we'll talk about crop rotation to prevent that. But in the beginning, consider that you're going to want to put your taller plants on the northern side of your garden so that your shorter plants will actually get more sun, right? So little things like that, you're going to want to put down the height of the plant, because that'll help influence where you're going to place it. You're going to want to write down whether or not you're going to direct sow this. Some things like beets can be direct sown into your garden, but other things like a tomato plant is going to need to be started probably in a greenhouse by you or somebody else, and then transplanted into your garden. So you need to know if it's a transplant plant or a direct sown plant. And then if you want to get into succession planting, then that is also something that you're going to want to put into your notes. Like I plant peas, and you can plant peas like every 2 weeks or so and get a continual crop. And that's a note that you're going to want to have written down. So it seems like a lot of information, right? But the more you do in the beginning, the more work that you do up front, then the easier time, in my opinion, hold on. Keep on trying to get to the chat and make sure I haven't missed anything. In my opinion, the more work that you do up front, the easier time that you're going to have, because you can just refer back to your notes and say, okay, yeah, this is 55 days to harvest. It's only been like 35 days. I know I'm super eager, but I shouldn't be expecting anything, because it's just not time, right? Said right there on the package. So questions right now. And again, I keep losing.
We don't have any questions so far.
No questions. Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, when you have questions, please say something in the chat or speak up. All right. So you've heard me talk about these different things like days to harvest and such, and you may ask yourself, well, how do I get that information? One of the places that you can get them is on the package of seeds themselves, which is really handy oftentimes. And I'm sorry, I don't have a visual aid, but let me think if I have it here. Oftentimes on the actual vegetable package, it will say things like days to harvest. It will say whether it needed to be direct sown or transplanted, or when you look in the seed catalogs, that information is going to be available for you. And if you look here, this is a hyperlink, but I'm not sure that you can click on that. It is the very first link in the chat. The CCE, Selected List of Vegetable Varieties for Gardeners in New York State, also contains this information to help you fill out your planting plan. So I know that some of you all might not want to click away from what we're doing here to go look at that website, but do you feel confident that you can locate this information to help you, or that you can find it in the seed catalog, or that you can find it in other places to help you fill out the planting plan? I'm looking for nods here. Yeah. Thanks, Ross. It gives me thumbs up. I love it. Well, if you have any questions, or you feel like this is something that you need more information, do let me know. So another big problem, especially for us in our region.
Oh, excuse me, Brandy, we do have one question.
Oh, yes.
So Amy asked, do you orient rows east-west or north-south?
That is a great question. Well, as you rotate your garden, you might find that you do it different ways, but I recommend that you do north-south. The sun comes up, and it's a southern exposure. So your southern exposure is the warmest, right? So you want your shorter plants on that side, and you want your taller plants on the northern side so that the taller plants are not shading out your shorter plants. Does that make sense? Now, again, when you, especially if you're working with a small space, you may have to balance competing interests. Another thing that you're going to think about is, I want to put my plants that require more watering together versus the plants that may want a drier climate. So you have little microclimates, and it's ideal to plant things in a certain way, but you may be, for example, let's say you have a trellis in your garden. If the trellis is kind of fixed and unmovable, it may be that you're not going to be able to rotate things out so much. So these are all factors that you keep in your head to try to think about the optimal way to plant, but it may not be the perfect way. And what's that old saying? Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Do you know what I mean? So ideally, you want to orient your rows north-south, again, for the purpose of keeping the taller plants from shading out the shorter plants. If you have so much space that that's not an issue, then, just keep that in mind, that plants in shade are not going to grow as tall. They're not going to fruit as much. And it may actually promote disease and pests. Does that help and answer your question? Jing, do you want to add anything to that? Okay. So in our area, planting by certain planting dates is really critical because we have frost that just goes like almost so far into, in fact, tonight, I think we're getting down in our area, we're getting down to 27. I'm brokenhearted, right? And everybody wants to start. When I first started gardening, I always started way too soon. So one of the first things that you need to discover is your last frost date. And this link is also in the chat for you to take a look at, the link for the last frost date in Chemung County, which I don't have that pulled up. Somebody can help me out. I think it's, well, does somebody else have that for me? I thought I could switch in between this presentation and the web, my browser, but that's not working. So you need to take a look at your last frost date. And when you have the last frost date, that can help you count backwards to when you can actually start your seeds indoors, or when you could consider planting, like for peas. I know I'm using peas as an example, too much probably, y'all, but peas can be started as soon as the ground is workable. As soon as the ground thaws enough that you can actually put a pea in there, you can start peas, but that's an unusual crop. Tomatoes, if you put them in too early, for one thing, you think you'll be getting like a jump on it. I had to learn this the hard way. Tomatoes want heat. Peppers want heat. And so when you start them in the ground and the ground's too cold, they'll just be stunted. They will actually lag behind plants you put in later when the ground is warmer. So you can actually take the temperature of your ground, and that's something that would be very useful. But also just looking at the average frost date to get an idea when the plants can be put in or when the plants need to be started as seedlings. Because how many of you guys are actually going to start seeds versus buying plants to transplant? So Karen's going to start seeds. That's awesome. And so Karen, you've done this before, right? You're muted.
Are you talking about putting seeds directly in the soil or seeds inside the house?
Seeds inside the house.
Oh, I don't do that. No, I put them directly in the soil.
Excellent. That's great too. If you did want to start plants, like to buy a packet of tomato seeds and start them in the house, then it's going to be very important to know when the last frost date is to help you determine when to start your seedlings. And the nice thing is it's going to be right on the package itself, and it will tell you when like it's, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 4 weeks, or what have you, that you start the seedlings inside to make sure that they are the optimal size to be transplanted outside. Does anybody here start seeds inside? Oh, there we are. See, sometimes the chat appears. Amy does. That's fantastic. And, oh, Daniel is winter sowing. That is so awesome. I love that technique. That is really great. And Kelly says that she typically starts with seeds in the house, depending on what she's planting. Awesome. That is wonderful. Amy says the onions are started. You've got seedling tomatoes, early cabbages are going in today or tomorrow. Excellent. And that is wonderful. Maria says that she is planning on starting. Great, y'all. Amy asks more about winter sowing, and we will get, actually, that's a great question. And forgive me, but we're going to come back to that at the end of the presentation, if you don't mind. Don't let me forget, okay? That's a great question. Winter sowing is a really nice technique, and it does actually go with what we're talking about regarding planning your garden, but I want to make sure I get through the whole presentation and we don't miss anything. So if you, that link that I gave the last frost date for Chemung County, but there's also, you can go take a look at this map. I don't find this map particularly helpful myself, but this is a general map for average last frost dates. Keeping in mind they are average, you know, we can only go from making predictions based on past performance. We don't, you know, we don't know 100%. And as you guys know, this spring is weird, isn't it? We've had a lot of odd springs. So seeds respond to conditions of the soil, moisture and temperature. I'm probably not telling you anything, y'all, anything that you don't already know, but do keep that in mind. Again, as I mentioned, some plants need it particularly warm, like peppers. Peppers want it hot. If you've ever actually started peppers indoors and from seeds, you'll discover they need that heat mat. They need a lot of warmth to make sure that they are germinating properly. They will not respond to if the temperature is too cool. Whereas other plants that are more conducive to our cooler climates, they do fine as long as they get enough moisture and not too much moisture, because again, if you have too much moisture, they can rot in the ground, unfortunately. But some plants like peas, for example, love it when it's just warm enough for the soil to actually move when they emerge. I mentioned briefly this thing called succession planting, and that is when you plant crops over a period of time. And this is good for short season crops, or when you're transitioning from spring crops to fall crops. Like, for example, garlic wants to go in the fall, right? And it overwinters. You would want to plant garlic after you've taken out your spring and summer crops and have that space available. And in the booklet that you'll be receiving, it shows, in fact, I'm going to move ahead really quick. I'll come back in just 1 minute, but I want to move ahead and show you that you're going to be given like examples of maps that can show you how you might consider doing, forgive me, I'm jumping ahead, how you might consider moving or transitioning from a spring crop. Where is it? Yeah, from a spring crop to a fall crop, for example. So you start cilantro in the spring, and then you could move in and put in cucumbers later. Or you could start spinach, and once that is taken out, you could actually put in tomatoes. Does that make sense, y'all? And I'm sorry about just jumping through here, but I'll go right back. So succession planting is when you put crops in succession. You can either stay with the same thing, like as I mentioned, peas are one that you would plant, and then 2 weeks later you'd put more peas, and then 2 weeks later you could put more peas. You know, if you want to have them actually come to fruition, if you want to make sure that they mature at the same time or different times, so you have enough to eat or can or whatever you need to do. People oftentimes like them to actually come on at different times so that you're not overwhelmed. And this also allows you to have a variety of crops available. Now, when we think about crop rotation, when we think about planting, it is very helpful for us to think about the different families, for us to have a basic and fundamental understanding of the families, the plant families, in order for us to appreciate how they may complement each other, where they grow best, and also to, later on, we're going to be discussing how you rotate to prevent disease burden, because if you put the same family in the ground over and over again, you increase your risk of actually attracting pests and also bringing in diseases that can reduce your yield year over year. So it's a great idea to move from one family to the next in the same soil space. Does that make sense to y'all? So, for example, beets are from the same family as chard and spinach. And so if you plant beets in one area, you may not want to put chard and spinach in that same area later. That can be something that you can put into your planting plan, so that you remember, okay, chard and spinach and beets, same family. I don't want to keep putting these crops in the same location. Cabbage. That includes broccoli, cauliflower, collard greens, kale, and even radishes and turnips. So you want to maybe not plant those over and over again in the same location. This information is in your booklet, by the way. You may be thinking to yourself, how do I find this out, right? How do I learn this? But don't be alarmed. It's actually right there in your booklet, and it will tell you, that the legumes here on the far right-hand side, this includes beans and peas. So you don't have to know this. You can actually look it up in the booklet that you'll be getting. Who can tell me what family tomatoes are in? You don't have to name it because I can't pronounce the words. So tell me what else are in the same family as tomatoes. Do you guys know? And Karen asks about companion planting. That is a great question. That is not part of the program that we're doing, but maybe we can address that at the end, I'm hoping. Karen, that's a really good question. So tomatoes are nightshades, and tomatoes include tomatillos, right? You probably knew that, but that also includes eggplants and peppers. So if you put tomatoes in a space one year, you may not want to replace them with peppers, but from a different family. Okay. So here is, actually, when I bring this up, do y'all actually see the chat? Yes, no? I'll minimize it just in case. So when you think about rotating the crops, again, it's important to know which plant belongs in which family, beets or carrots or squash. And that can help you to group them together. And this goes a little bit to what Karen talked about regarding companion planting. That's a very good question that we'll get to in just a minute. But it can also help you rotate it. So again, if you have tomatoes one year in an area, you may want to move the carrots over to that area. And some things that you might be keeping, some plants may be perennial that you'll be keeping year after year. So herbs are perennial, or some herbs are perennial, and it's okay if they stay in the same area year after year. That's not a problem. So you may have a location where you say, oh, okay, I'm going to put my perennial herbs here. I know they come up every year. I have sage, for example, that comes up every year, parsley, that kind of thing. And that's okay. But generally, if it's a crop that grows and you remove it at the end of this growing season, that's something that you want to try to rotate. So here is an example of a planting map, which you saw on a previous screen. This is the kind of thing that may be helpful for you to develop for your own garden. And again, I know it's like when I talk to my class about doing things like outlining for a paper. Oftentimes my students say, I don't want to do it. I just want to write the paper, right? And I know that when you want to garden, you just want to go out there and garden, right? And sometimes making an actual map seems a little overwhelming. But the nice thing is that, again, it helps you plan for the future. Also, as I mentioned previously, I don't remember things. So it's nice when you have this map for this year, you can save it for a couple of years and go back and say, oh, that's right. In 2019, I planted beans in this area and they did great, or they did horribly, right? So it's really nice to have a map, even just a sketch on the back of a piece of scrap paper that can help you to remember where you intend to put things or where you did put things, and how, again, the footprint of the plant, we mentioned these footprints for when they, here's a good example. Here we are. See, tomatoes, they're tiny little plants when you get them at the store, and then when they mature, their footprint's huge. And you need space around these plants in order for them to get the proper amount of sun, the proper amount of wind to keep the leaves dry, because tomatoes can suffer from disease if they get wet and stay wet. So they need, they don't do well. No, plants do not do well when they're crowded. You need to think about their size, and sketching out your garden map can help you to reduce or to make sure that you have an appropriate amount of space. I know when I first started, I was shocked at how few plants I could get into my garden. I was like, no, I really want to, I bought this whole flat of tomatoes, right? They're going in the ground. But the truth is your plants aren't going to do that well if they're overcrowded. So consider, when you work on your map, that can help you to figure out the footprint of the plants. So you'll sketch out your space. It can be something very simple. It doesn't have to be super fancy. Just try to see if you can make it show the size. And you may be thinking to yourself, gosh, I don't know how to measure. You know, do I have to buy, do I have to go out there with a measuring tape? You can actually use your own feet, right? Literally walk with your own feet, heel toe. And that can give you a general idea as to how much a foot is. And as long as it's consistent, you can, you don't have to have any kind of special measuring tool or anything to help you figure out the spacing. You can actually just walk with your own feet and just count. Okay, I know this space is 5 brandy feet wide and 5 brandy feet long. And that can help, if you are consistent from space to space, then you can actually, you don't have to purchase anything fancy or do anything fancy. And again, I'm hoping that this doesn't feel overwhelming to folks, like it's, a homework assignment. It's supposed to be fun, right? You can get graph paper, or again, just sketch it out yourself. That can help you to figure out if you have the measurements for your space, 5 brandy feet long, 5 brandy feet wide. This can tell you that generally speaking, you can put so many radishes or so many carrots or so many tomato plants in. Think about, again, the orientation, right? We talked earlier about how you need to be, the plants need to be facing, it's nice to have them facing, have a north-south orientation, with the taller plants on the northern side and the shorter plants on the southern side, in order for them to maximize their sunlight. Think about the footprints, as we spoke about. We talked about the fact that these plants need airflow, circulation, in order to reduce pests. All right, so we've gone through this. And here's a graphic, in case, I know we spoke about it, but here's a graphic for you to see and appreciate. Again, how you want your shorter plants to be closer to the southern exposure than the taller plants. Does that make sense to everybody? And we've also spoken about succession planting. So when you're finished with salad greens, as an example, salad greens, they don't like the heat. right? We've been talking a lot about how plants don't like it cold, but salad greens don't like it hot. So they'll bolt if they get too warm in the summertime. So it's time for them to come out, and then you can start putting in plants that do like it warm. Now, surely at this point, y'all have questions.
Don't know if you're going to cover it or not, but what would you recommend planting around the perimeter of the garden to keep pests like woodchucks and rabbits? I'd heard marigolds,
Right.
but I didn't know if there was anything else.
That is a great question. Yeah, I've heard marigolds as well. I've tried it one year and didn't notice much of a difference. I've heard some people, what they've done is they have planted actually trap crops. Like, you guys go eat this stuff. I'll plant it for you over here. And maybe if they're eating it over there, they don't come and eat the things I want to keep safe and protected. And I've done that with some perennials. I actually have arborvitae that I planted for just for the deer to eat. So along the perimeter, you can look, garlic is one that pests don't tend to like. And I've heard people put things like garlic around the base of trees that they want to keep predators from chewing. Jean, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Oh, well, so for us, actually, the traps work best. Yeah. We use like traps for voles, mice. Yeah.
Amy says that grouping by family, I've read to mix up families to prevent pests from devouring, but that makes rotation difficult. And that's a great point. That's another consideration. So maybe you want to mix up the families that you put together in order to keep from attracting insects. Like insects, especially if you have a lot of the same family in one location, the insects that like that family are going to be really attracted to a huge clump of plants that are like that. So maybe mixing them up. As Ross said, if you put in marigolds with tomatoes, that can help to reduce some insect predation. And you're right, Amy, that seems to be a little bit of a contradiction, perhaps, or at least apparent on its surface when it comes to rotation. I think the bigger message, or the biggest message that I would say for this is to recognize that you need to not put plants in the same place over and over. Like, for example, I have trellises. I'm very proud. My husband was very proud to build these trellises, and he broke his heart because I'm like, honey, I can't put tomatoes here every year. I know that you made me a beautiful tomato trellis, but we have to rotate it out and put something else, because once you get disease pressure, you know, that can mean that you can't grow something for a long time in a particular area. So the rotation is beneficial, but also I think that Amy makes an excellent point that intercropping plants is also very helpful for confusing predators. So Ross, as far as planting things on the periphery, strong smelling things like onions and garlic can help to prevent, or not prevent, I wish I knew how to prevent, but can reduce the animal predation. So if you want to try that along the fence line. Now, some people might feel that the fence line is the perfect place to grow things that are taller too. So if you put in garlic, you may feel like that's taking away your ability to put in, say, tomatoes or other vining crops. So I know you got to balance that, right? I think that's the message of our talk today, which is it's kind of a balance of competing interests. But Amy raises an excellent point that you can intercrop. Maybe you can have a tomato and a garlic next to each other. Any other questions? Amy says, so I've given up on pest control. I ordered electronic mesh fencing to go around my garden. Last year, that woodchuck ate all of my Brussels sprouts before they even got planted. Mowed down the beans at first leaf. Yeah, that's a challenge. We had a cat. Unfortunately, she passed away, but she was wonderful at keeping away little chewy things. I'm not looking forward to this year without a cat. So we will be, this class, this 5-week session will be addressing predators and also addressing some solutions or some approaches for reducing predator pressure. She says, Amy writes, how long do you leave lights on for long day onion seedlings? That is a good question. If you guys are into doing seed starts in your in a greenhouse, or I do mine in the basement, one of the things that I would recommend that you consider investing in is a timer, because if you're like me and you tend to forget to turn the lights off, that could be, you don't want to leave lights on year round. It's not the worst thing in the world, but plants need darkness like they need light. So when you do seedlings, like if you're just starting a tray in the window, you know, that will actually give you the day-night cycle that you need naturally. But if you're doing it in a different setup and you have grow lights, then definitely consider using, I think they're fairly economical and affordable, just a timer for your setup, for your grow lights. As far as how long, I would recommend that you look at the packaging, you look at the seed catalog that you got them from, or consult the person if you got them, say, from Banfield Baker. They might have, they might tell you what the best option is for that. So just look on the package of seeds, or look at the seed catalog. The seed vendor's website may have that information as well. Does that help?
So for usually for seedlings, they need at least 12 to 16 hours of light during the day. Actually, 14 to 16 hours will be better.
Thank you, Jingjing. That's awesome. Yeah. So they need a lot of light, but just not like, don't do what I did the first year when you just leave the lights on. Because if sunlight is good, all light is better. They do need a break. They need the lights to come off a little bit if you're using grow lights. So you're saying they bulb at 14 to 16 hours of daylight. I have never done onions, so you know more about onions than I do. That is, but again, the resources that were listed will probably provide that information for you if you can't find it either through the people who sold you the seeds or the bulbs. And I'm sorry I couldn't be more helpful on that. So let me, we've talked about how you can do succession planting, how you want to consider crop rotation in order to reduce disease pressure. And we've talked about how it is that some plants into their growing season early, which gives you an opportunity to bring in plants that want to start growing, say in the fall, for example. Kale and chard are wonderful plants that are that grow well in the cold. In fact, kale gets sweeter if it goes through a frost. So it's a fantastic plant to put in for your fall growing. Have any of you all made planting maps by any chance? No? I'm hoping that you will consider doing this, that you see it as a good opportunity to have a record of what you're doing, and also make a good plan for what you think. Because again, when I started sketching mine out, one of the things I discovered is, even though in my head I had this idea that it was going to work out, it turns out that when I actually listed everything I wanted to plant and I put down my space, you know, my beautiful plan was not going to work. And so sketching it really helped to prevent problems that would have happened if I'd gone out there and just, you know, commando gardened. So when you make your map, think about the footprint, think about the height of the plants, think about the rotation or the intercropping, as Amy pointed out. That's a great suggestion. And then think about the succession planting. So at this point, have y'all ever thought about, I asked at the beginning, at the top of the hour, what you wanted to actually aspire to plant? And have you thought at this point about any You know, has our talk today helped inspire you to maybe consider something new or different? Like, has this maybe gotten you to think about planting garlic or kale? Have you changed your mind about how you're going to approach tomatoes, for example?
Yeah, definitely the tomatoes. That was my problem child last year. I had 6 plants. I had them in boxes,
Mm-hmm.
and I had them, you know, like a good 18, 24 inches apart, and yet I still didn't get the yield off of them. And I don't know if it was, and I had them in a greenhouse until the wind blew it away.
Oh.
But I don't know if it was too moist, if there was too much moisture, or overwatered. Again, last year was a failed experiment, so didn't get much yield off of what I put into it. So I'm hoping to turn that around this year.
Yeah, tomatoes have been problematic for me. Everybody has great luck with tomatoes. I myself also struggle with them. But one thing you might consider is if you're trying to fertilize with a lot of nitrogen, sometimes nitrogen can make them overleaf as opposed to putting on fruits. Mm-hmm. Also consider pollinators, and that's going to be something that these classes will be talking about later on. If you don't get proper pollination, as you walk out there and you look at your tomato plants, you'll see that they actually put out flowers. But if you look carefully, you can check to see if they're being pollinated or if they just fall off. So that's something else to think about. And Amy says that she grows garlic and they're very easy and rewarding because nobody eats them. Yes, I agree. I love garlic. Yes, and nobody eats them, and you can plant them around trees, for example, fruit trees, and then that helps to keep rabbits and such away from them. Yeah. Maura says that you're thinking now about growing garlic and kale, perhaps onions. That's great. That is fantastic. Marianne asks about broccoli or broccoli rub. It is my understanding, I myself have not yet tried broccoli or cabbage because of the cabbage moths. So from what I was told by another master gardener is that you should really seriously consider growing them in row covers or low tunnels if you can, because we have such a problem with cabbage moths in our area. Does anybody have anything they want to say about that? And Karen said that she would like to try garlic and potatoes. That is awesome. What's a cabbage moth? Well, they are beautiful white butterflies. In fact, I used to call them white butterflies. If you ever see them, they're very distinctive. And they are heavy predators on things like broccoli and cabbage. They'll chew them up pretty well. Have you guys seen those white butterflies I'm talking about? I can't be the only one. They're moths, they're not butterflies. Mara asks, how do snow peas do in our area? Snow peas do very well. Snow peas are wonderful for cool season, which is like right now. You could go buy snow peas and plant them right now, and you'll be very pleased. They do well when it's cold. I haven't noticed that they have a lot of predators. You can succession plant them, as we mentioned at the very beginning, so you can plant snow peas now and then 2 weeks from now, and you could probably get a third planting in there so that you have yields that come up. Pick them early, pick them young. You can eat them right off the vine. My kids do. Chris writes that row covers are very helpful to prevent cabbage moths on broccoli, cabbage, and cauliflower. That is my understanding, that you really want to keep row covers on the brassicas. And so Mara, as far as snow peas go, there's a whole bunch of different varieties. So you can take a look at the different seed catalogs and see what sounds good to you. Pretty much any pea can be a nice tender eating pea if you pick it young enough. And the seed packages will tell you the days to yield. So just look on the seed package to see if it's an early variety or a late variety, or make sure that you don't do what I did one year and buy canning peas if you're wanting snow peas. So John says that eggshells and soil sometimes helps for tomatoes, Ross. I recommend, and again, I know it sometimes I feel like I'm giving you guys homework, but I really recommend that you do a soil test before you do any soil amendments. We all hear things. We read things on the internet. I'm constantly reading stuff, and I'm like, this sounds really great. But the truth is, you don't know what to amend in your soil unless you've done a soil test, and they're economical, and it will give you a lot of really great information. And then you'll know, really, do I need calcium? Or, you know, is it another nutrient that I may be lacking? And next week, we're going to be talking about soil amendments. So next week, that's going to be something that hopefully will help you to better understand how to do that. Now, again, I know a lot of folks, they say they start tomato seedlings in their eggshells and plant the seedlings right in the eggshells in the ground. And that, you know, that calcium can help with blossom end rot. But if you don't have a lack of calcium, you know, you really do need to know what your soil is like. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I love grandma's remedies. I've followed them myself many times, but if we want to approach things methodically, especially now that we're keeping records for how things are done, the best way is to fully appreciate what our soil has. And if you have an overabundance of a nutrient, and amending with that same nutrient can be a problem. So.
Oh, Brandy, we have one question we haven't answered yet.
Oh, yes, thank you.
What is winter sowing?
Oh, thank you, Jingxing. Yes, winter sowing. So winter sowing is an approach where you actually put the seedlings in something like a milk jug, and you put it outside, you know, right outside in the winter, and you let the warmth of the warmth of the spring come in and sprout things naturally within your jug, and that tells you when the plant wants to come up or when the plant's ready. And I've heard some people have really good results from that. They actually put their seedlings in these milk jugs, they put them out on their patio, right, and it gets snowed on and everything else. And that is an approach, you know, that you may want to try. That may yield good results. In our area, it might also be a problem. I haven't yet tried it. It sounds fantastic, but with our propensity to get overnight freezes, we could, I suspect that you could see some loss. In fact, let me see if I can find, if I have information about that. Yeah, our area is a little bit unusual. Like, say in the South, winter sowing is very common or prevalent in the South. And I don't know that it would necessarily work here, because I could just imagine you'd see your beautiful little seedlings come up because it's gotten so warm, right? And then like tonight it's going to get 27, and I think you get it'll kill things at about what, 23, 24 degrees. It'll just take them right out. So I don't have a slide for that, y'all. I apologize. So winter sowing is, and if any of you are doing winter sowing and have had better experience, please do let me know. And so Daniel says that he's had much better success with winter sowing than growing indoors. So there you go. Now, what are you doing tender plants, Daniel, or what are you sowing in the winter, or what are you doing winter sowing with?
So last year was my first year doing it. And I planted everything, like all my winter seeds, all my cold season and warm season, all in February. And I did have some issues with the warm season plants starting to grow and then having issues when it got too cold. So this year, I started all my cold season stuff back in February. They're doing great. I've actually transplanted some of them outside into a cold frame I have, and they're doing well. I have others that are still in the jugs that are growing great. My lettuce is probably 2 inches tall now inside the jugs.
Awesome.
And then I just planted this year. I decided to start the warm season towards the end of March. So just this past weekend, I planted out some tomatoes and peppers in the jugs.
That is fantastic. So, but you're using a cold frame, right?
So I'm using the jugs first,
Mm-hmm.
and then I planted a bunch of different, kind of doing succession planting.
Mm-hmm.
So I planted all my lettuces out in the jugs first, and I took some of them and put them in the cold frame to kind of give them a head start. And then I've transplanted from the jugs into the cold frame already.
Wow, that's fantastic. Wonderful. And you haven't had problems with the freezing overnight?
Not for the cold frame, or sorry, not for the cold season crops. I have a bunch of lettuces, kale, some onions I started, but last year I had issues with, I actually had corn that was growing out the top of the jugs, I think in the middle of April, when we had some late colds, and that ended up killing them. So I haven't even started any corn yet. That
is awesome. I'm glad to hear that you've actually applied this and have had some experience. So if any of you want to try it and haven't done it before, I probably, I myself probably wouldn't do it with the more tender plants or the more heat-loving plants, but it certainly seems like a neat idea. And I really am very grateful, Daniel, for you sharing your experience. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I did. My tomatoes I planted last year in February survived inside the jugs, no problem.
That's amazing. That's really great.
And I just waited to plant them out until the temperature warmed up.
Wow.
Brandy, we have one more question. Last question. Amy was wondering about winter sowing directly in the soil late November.
That is generally speaking, it depends on there are some plants that want that. Like garlic is a good example. They really want to be sown in the fall, and they grow over winter. They overwinter, and then they come up and you harvest them in the summertime. But generally speaking, there's a reason why we don't approach it that way. When I say we, I mean it's not a good approach for certain plants that don't have proper protection. So a cold frame or a row cover, or Daniel is doing the winter sowing, it's a great idea. Now, all of us have had experience, I'm imagining, where you've gone out in your garden and you've found that there have been volunteers that come up. Obviously, they do very well, right? Yeah, exactly. Volunteers. So the plants do survive. The seeds will survive and grow when the conditions are right. And the challenge is that especially when you're working on your planning map and you're doing it, you want a specific plant in a certain location, and you can't rely on volunteers coming up when you want them, and you can't rely on them coming up where you want them. Oftentimes they grow really well in compost piles, which are warmer than other areas because of the activity of the compost, because you have a lot of microbial activity. So, I mean, you could try it, and I would love to hear experiences, but I couldn't in good conscience recommend it as an approach for a lot of plants that aren't intended to be grown that way, because it's not a way to actually have a methodical garden or a planned garden, which is, I think, the best way to have the yield that you're going to want. I mean, you're planning on having a certain number of tomatoes to feed your family or to use, you know what I mean? And if you're relying upon the seeds surviving the winter, coming up, surviving the spring freezes and such, then you may not get the optimal results. Does that make sense, y'all?
Yeah, so I have tried overwinter some seeds. I tried with like spinach, carrots, onion, beets, and peas. But I have a low tunnel, and my low tunnel is not just one layer. So I put low cover over the over my bed, and then a plastic layer, you know. So it's like 2-layer low tunnel. And I planted my spinach seeds in like late November and harvest them in February. Those were the sweetest spinach I have ever had. And also the carrots were very, very sweet. So, but you want to try with the species that is very cold tolerant, very, very hardy. And you may want some like protection, you know, like low tunnel, like cold frame, that kind of thing. Yeah.
That's awesome, Jing Jing. That's really great. I also overwintered kale. I didn't think I was going to be able to in our area, and I didn't cover it at all. I just left it, and it was like, if you live, you live. And it did. It's surviving. But another thing that you discover if you let things grow perennially that you don't necessarily grow perennially is the second year, it's almost a completely different plant. That's something else you discover if you let things grow and they're not treated like the annual that they are often regarded. Is it when the kale came up the second year, it was it had bolted and it was not tasty. It was not a good plant for eating.
Thank you very much, Brandy. Thank you for the great information. So next week, we're going to talk about soil and composting. And it's going to be presented by Peg, who is our master gardener and also our master composter. So hope to see you next Monday at 2 o'clock. Thank you, everyone, for coming to the webinar today. And thank you, Brandy, again, for the great presentation. Have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, y'all.